Okay, welcome everybody to Release Trapped Emotions Live. Great to have you here. We are going to talk today about the emotion of overwhelm. And we have our little foster pup here helping. She wants to, where are you? Here she is. Hold on. Here she is. Cinder wants to help. So she wants to be here and be with you guys while we talk about mastering our emotions and being an emotional ninja. So, overwhelm is an emotion that kind of leads us to anxiety and leads us to a heightened, active kind of state of being. And overwhelm is an emotion that can get us into a reaction space, right? Where we're reacting to the anxiety, we're reacting to the overwhelm, we're reacting to the feeling tapped out, right? Feeling tapped out. So then we're in that flat fight or flight mode, right? So what I wanted to do today in talking about overwhelm is just give you some pointers on how to navigate when you feel overwhelmed, what to do when you feel overwhelmed, so that then you can start using these practices in your own life. And I call them emotional ninja hacks. So if you've been here a while and you've come to these Release Trapped Emotions Live or seen any of my other videos, you'll know that yeah, I've been called an emotional ninja, and the work that I do with my clients is helping them become emotional ninjas. And a lot of the tips and tricks that I share, I call emotional ninja hacks. So that's what we're gonna um, kind of talk about. And for those of you that are new, um, make sure that you put some comments in the in the chat so that I can answer any questions. I can support you if there's anything that maybe you're going through in your life and you need some support. Um, I can support you, and I think a few minutes we'll have one of my clients come in to do some release work. So you'll witness that as well. How do we release trapped emotions? What does it mean? How can it be supportive for your life and your conditioning or reconditioning, should I say? Um, yeah, and so just make sure that you put any questions in the comments. Let me, in fact, go to so I can watch your guys' comments. And there we go. Here we go. Perfect. So, overwhelm. So overwhelm, like I was saying, it's this heightened state of activity, hypersense activity, where you feel tapped out, right? You feel tapped out. And so then the immediate response is to react and either reject, react, shut down, right? And so when you're in overwhelm, the key, the emotional ninja hack, and the key is to take a breath, take a pause, and choose one thing to take to completion. And then when you've completed that, choose the next thing and bring it to completion. Because overwhelm happens when there's a lot that we have on our plate. Like I was saying, we feel tapped out. There's too much happening. And so the the important the important part of taking that step back and taking that breath is to look at what's on your plate, choose the first thing that you feel needs to be handled, and and complete it. And then choose the next and then complete it. So what happens is when you are in overwhelm, there's too much happening. Maybe you're doing too many things at once and they're not getting finished. And so what happens is you're left with this sense of incompletion. And the sense of incompletion actually hinders on your self-worth, your self-value, your confidence, right? So what we want to do is we want you to complete, because with the completion, then you raise your confidence, you raise your personal expectations of what you can do, therefore you feel better about yourself. And you raise your self value because you're demonstrating, creating evidence that you can complete things, right? And so that's what you want to do. You want to get into the habit of using your awareness. Notice when you're overwhelmed, in overwhelm, take that one thing that's the most important to you in that moment, complete it. Then, after you're done with the completion, you want to celebrate. You celebrate that completion. So what that's doing is it's creating an anchor into the completion. And it's creating an anchor into doing one thing at a time, right? So a lot of people with ADHD have this issue where they're tackling a lot of things at once, and then they get into overwhelm, right? And so in that tackling too many things, then what happens is then they dog on themselves because they're not completing things. They have too much on their plate. They're not completing things. And then they create this negative sense of self that then brings them down a downward spiral, right? So I'm just giving you an example. So in that case, and in any case really, but in that case, it's taking that pause in the awareness. Taking that pause in the awareness. And then specifically also celebrating when the completion happens. Because what we want to do is we want to create new patterns that are self-empowering. We want to create new patterns that are in alignment with what it is that you want to experience and in alignment with the goals that you want to achieve, right? So I was actually speaking with a client earlier, around the fact that she feels that she's constantly operating out of survival mode because she's in constant overwhelm. And so we were talking about this strategy for her. And her first response was, oh, well, I can't do that. Like that's what I do all day. That's what I deal with. And that's it. It was almost like she was in, oh, what's that word? She was in giving up, right? It's like, well, this is just how it's going to be. But the moment that we talked about this strategy, I just saw her face light up, right? I was like, oh, wait a minute. I can just do, it was almost like I can do one thing at a time. So it was almost like she had this belief that she had to do everything at the same time so that everything could be done. And also the other thing that we talked about was, um, it's okay to not complete everything that's on your to-do list. Some things you might not be able to get done and you just move them to the next day, right? And so for her, it was really important to get that permission, to give herself that permission to, number one, it's okay if you don't do them all. Number two, also seek help, right? That was something that she wasn't doing, but mainly doing that one thing at a time, right? Completing and celebrating, completing and celebrating, completing and celebrating. When we complete and celebrate, it anchors ourselves in the positive evidence that we've created, therefore, in our self-confidence. It anchors ourselves into a new pattern that, as we notice, supports us, feels good to us, we'll want to do more of, therefore deepens the anchor, right? And then it just allows us to then diminish that overwhelm, starts kind of dissipating. It starts releasing. So if you have had moments of overwhelm, or if you're one of those people that lives in overwhelm because of maybe a diagnosis of ADHD, or maybe because you have a hard time seeking out for help, right? Take that pause and look and see where you can create, where you can make a difference, where you can create more space. So is it in that taking one thing at a time? Is it in seeking help and looking for support? Is it in being creative and using creative ideas as to how you can get things off your to-do list? For an example, this one client that I was talking to earlier, she was taking on a lot of the things in the household without having asking her husband. And so the moment that she actually asked her husband to do some things, he was like, "Oh, yeah, of course, I can do that." And there was like an, yes, of course, right? But in her mind, it was like she was judging his coming home exhausted and late and taking things on without actually eh, bringing him into the conversation of, "Hey, honey, look, I've got a lot of things on my plate on top of my own business. Can you support here in this thing and in that thing?" So she didn't think that that was even a possibility, right? And so in the moment that she actually took that step and saw that he was actually receptive and took on some things, created some space for her, right? Created some space. And so these are all things that one can implement and can look at in implementing when you're feeling that overwhelming, tapped out feeling, right? Um, and so overwhelm is also an emotion that's connected with a couple of other emotions. So it's connected with the emotion of anxiety. So a lot of times we become anxious when we're overwhelmed. We become a bit frenetic, right, in our dealings and our responses. Um, it is connected to also confusion. Sometimes when we're in overwhelm, we also get confused. Um, and so we drop the ball. I know I've done that, right? We drop the ball because we're either confused or we forget, or there's just too much that a brain can't hold. That's also the other thing that you want to remember, is that the brain can only hold on to 10% of the information that it receives, right? The other 90% is processed in the subconscious. So if you think about that, and you're overwhelmed and you've got a lot on your plate and you've got a lot that you're dealing with, not everything can be processed. So then it gets get tapped into the subconscious, which then hey, there's a lot of stuff in the subconscious, right? There's a lot of triggers there. So that's what then happens, right? We get triggered. We get triggered. It becomes an automatic response. It becomes a subconscious undertone. And so when you are looking at overwhelm and the other sub emotions that it's connected to, then the moment of awareness of overwhelm is even more important, because then it allows you to manage all of the other emotions, right? And overwhelm is also an emotion that affects our health. It affects our health, our blood pressure. It affects our feeling of dis-ease in the body around chronic diseases that come up. It can affect our heart rate and the way that our heart activity um, goes on right throughout the day, especially if we're constantly living in a sense of overwhelm, it's actually affecting our heart rate and our heartbeat. Um, so our body takes the brunt of our negative emotions, right? So we want to watch that as well, because especially nowadays with a lot of the medical industry wanting to just give us a tape, a band-aid, right? To our chronic illnesses and our chronic diseases. And I say dis-ease on purpose because it's a dis-ease, right, in the body. Um, we want to make sure that we don't get caught into the surface medication, right, of the whole process. And I'm kind of going on a tangent here a little bit because I see a lot of this happening. And while all it is, it could just be a self-management, right? And it could just be it's a uh just a self-awareness thing, that process that you can engage in instead of having to just resort to taking medication, right? Now, obviously, there's some things that we want to take medication for, so I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about sometimes overwhelm puts us in a flight or fight response that then brings up certain symptoms that look like certain illnesses or diseases that might not necessarily be that. It just might be you just taking that pause, taking that breath, managing your emotions, managing your overwhelm, managing your anxiety so that it allows you to self manage and regulate instead of going to self medicate. Just want to create that distinction here for a second. So as we deal with anxiety, overwhelm, oh, let me see who's coming in. Deborah, here we go. So as I was saying, as we deal with overwhelm and um, anxiety and hypertension and things that really throw us off track, because overwhelm does that. It throws us off track. It kind of takes us out of the important thing that we're really trying to work on or have happen or create, right? And so when we are taken off track and we are um, kind of diverted away from creating the positive evidence, from looking for the next better feeling place, from stepping into our highest and best version of ourselves, tapping into our inner resources, right? When we're taken away from that, we are actually connected to a lower version of ourselves, and what I call are not self, right? So we want to instead be tapped into and connected to our highest self, the best and better version, right? And so if you are watching this live and you do have any questions or anything that you're experiencing now around overwhelm, please put a comment. Would love to support you. If not, just remember, it's taking that pause, taking that breath, taking the first most important thing that you need to complete, take it to completion, and then celebrate. And then go to the next, and then celebrate, and then go to the next, and then celebrate. Practice that, see how that feels, and then let me know. Come back here.